is Jessica Van Parys, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Economics. I teach undergraduate and master's level econometrics. In econometrics, what we're doing is we're using data and statistical models to test hypotheses about economic questions that we find interesting. So fundamentally, what we're trying to do in econometrics is we're trying to determine what's the causal effect of one variable on another. And so a key part of the class is me teaching my students how to differentiate correlation from causality in the models that we estimate. And so we write code in my class to analyze data, to estimate models. There's a lot of interpretation that's involved with the output. And so it is a combination of learning the theory of econometrics with learning the practice of econometrics. So one word we use a lot in econometrics is endogeneity. And the basic idea is that when we're trying to estimate the causal relationship between one variable and another, if one of those variables is endogenous, it means that we have to account for other factors and use more sophisticated models. So when someone says the model's endogenous or that variable's endogenous, it usually indicates to the student that they need to do something different. They need to think a little bit harder about what they're estimating. So one strand of my research that I've been focused on recently is the importance of access to high-speed broadband internet. Did you know that some states restrict local municipalities and cooperatives from building their own broadband infrastructure and providing broadband to their constituents? The reason why this is important is because not all geographies in the United States have complete access to broadband at home. And even in some jurisdictions where broadband is technically available, it can sometimes be prohibitively expensive for some households. So I worked with a student to think about what implications do these local restrictions have on local labor markets, particularly now when working from home is becoming more commonplace. So what we did in this paper, which was my student's thesis, is we compared labor market participation for people in states that have these local restrictions to labor force participation to people that live in states without these restrictions before and after the pandemic. And what we found is that particularly for married women with children, they were less likely to work during the COVID pandemic if they lived in states that had these restrictions on broadband access. And our interpretation of that result is that as people were moving toward working from home during COVID, it was harder to do that if you lived in a state that had restrictions. So the overall message of our paper is that these restrictions can have implications on the labor market outcomes of particularly women with young children. I initially was very interested in the role of information in general on people's choices regarding healthcare providers. And there is some research already looking at the impacts of very specific websites on people's choices, but there wasn't really much research about just the advent of the internet in general, and therefore how much, there's more than one website that people can consult. And so having internet access overall might be more impactful than thinking about the impacts of only one website at a time. And so that was one big reason why we focused on broadband, the role of broadband rollout in terms of explaining health outcomes. And another reason was very practical, actually. We had data on broadband rollout from the FCC in the early 2000s. So that allowed us to do this kind of empirical design and use econometrics to answer this question. So I really enjoy teaching at Hunter. Generally, I find the students to be very engaging and hardworking and determined, and I really respect those qualities. I teach difficult classes. I know the classes are difficult, but a lot of my students really apply themselves, and I think they get a lot out of the classes. And oftentimes, I get really excited when they get excited about econometrics because I do think it's really applicable to other fields outside of economics and in the labor force today. So I enjoy teaching them how to code, and I get excited when they have success with it and when they're able to take it to the next level. Another great aspect of my job is advising students at Hunter. So I don't only teach and then do my research separately. I've really tried to integrate students into my research. And so the example I gave about um, these local restrictions on municipal broadband and the impacts on labor markets, one of my students, a master's student, used that idea to write his master's thesis, and it's now a joint paper that we have together. And I have other students working on other topics in health largely, but not exclusively. And I think that that's been really fun, and it's something I hope to continue to do. And so it helps when I train students in econometrics, and then I can work with them on research after the fact.